Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Counselors of Real Estate, welcome to this presentation of Medical Office. Is it what the doctor ordered? Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Deborah Cloutier, the 2025 Second Vice Chair of the Counselors of Real Estate, and also the President and Founder of RETech Advisors in McLean, Virginia, where I focus on sustainability in commercial real estate. The Counselors of Real Estate is a distinguished international group of advisors addressing real estate challenges worldwide, experienced, innovative, principled, and credentialed problem solvers. The counselors reside in 22 countries, practicing in many more, and offer expertise in 60 plus real estate disciplines across all asset classes. Each has earned the prestigious CRE designation. Let's recognize our 2024 sponsors: Busak Real Estate, Equus Capital Partners, J.P. Wigan and Sons, McCurdy, Riskin, Olson, and Delpel, and W.P.J. McCarthy and Company. Thank you all very much for your support of our webinar series. You're encouraged to utilize the Q&A feature throughout today's session to submit any questions, and your participation is highly encouraged. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can as time allows. I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Debbie Nisson, CRE. Following a distinguished career in asset and portfolio management, Debbie has been a co-chair of the governing board of Heartland Capital Strategies, a nonprofit that promotes sustainable and responsible investment. She is also the publisher of Real Estate Issues, the Counselors of Real Estate's peer-reviewed professional journal, and will be a liaison vice chair for the organization in 2025. Debbie was invited to membership in the counselors in 2010. Welcome, Debbie, and I turn it over to you and the team.
Thank you, Deb. Good afternoon. Well, we have an all-star lineup for you today with 4 experts who, together with their respective companies, cover all the bases when it comes to medical office buildings. I would also like to put in a plug to counselors that are on the call to attend our annual meetings in person, because the germ of the idea for this webinar came from a conversation Catherine House and I had one day over lunch after we had just met, and many other things like that occur when we meet in person. With that, I'm going to briefly introduce our panel because we really want to get to the meat of the topic. Catherine House is National Chair of Medical Real Estate at the brokerage company SVN and also co-lead of the Crew Network Medical Council. She is also Chair of the Counselors of Real Estate in Northern California. David Lynn, Ph.D., CRE, is the founder and CEO of Unity Medical Properties, which is focused on private equity real estate, investing and managing in medical buildings around the country. Jennifer Young, CCIM and CPM, is the head of asset management for MedProperties and has worked on both national and international projects with a strong focus on acquisitions, development, and asset management. Andrew Pyke, Managing Director of Nuveen, leads Nuveen's healthcare real estate strategy nationally, focused on medical office, life science, and senior housing. Andrew oversees several investment funds that include a non-traded REIT and both open and closed-end funds. There's a lot of ground to cover in an hour, so we're going to focus on trends that these 4 experts see in this marketplace and other things if time allows. Our first question is, what is the impact of private equity investment? David Lynn, you're at bat.
Well, thank you. Good morning. Well, private equity is kind of the new boogeyman these days in our economy, right? Some of that is founded, some of it is not. Why is private equity attracted to the medical sector? First of all, it's very large. It's been growing. It's one of the higher, maybe it is the highest growth sector of our economy over the last couple of decades. Biggest employment generator. It's very inefficient. So there are a lot of reasons why private equity is attracted to it. So margins are pretty high. I'd say in the medical sector, private equity has mainly been attracted to the operators, so hospitals and doctors and operations. A little bit less in private equity real estate, but in private equity real estate as well. I think a lot of the concerns and criticisms you hear about private equity in medical in the medical sector about, gee, they're going to come in, and some of it is true. They're really, their aim is economic and financial performance, not medical care delivery, right? So they're going to look to optimize returns for operators. So these are hospitals and doctors and specialties. So that could involve cost cutting, which it often does, making operations more efficient, right? Which could result in higher prices for patients in the system. So, but on the other hand, things can be more efficient. Operations can, hospitals, many hospitals are really focused on healthcare. They're not focused on financial return, financial performance. So they can really, make operations more efficient. They can make them more, they can aggregate operations and achieve economies of scale and scope. And that could be good for the ecosystem and good for patients as well. They could provide capital for capital investing. On the real estate side, particularly medical office buildings, or I like to say medical outpatient buildings, we can do a lot of the same. We don't usually get involved in operations, right? We're collecting rents as a landlord, owner, operator. We try to make our buildings efficient as possible. So when we acquire a building, for example, and this is many real estate private equity operators, we look to see how we can improve the building, improve the environment, the infrastructure, if you will. And so we're not usually trying to cut costs for the tenant. We usually inherit fairly healthy tenants and stay out of their operations, right? But we'll put investments in the building. Maybe we'll upgrade it. We'll, provide for example, if it's below ADA compliance, we'll bring it up to compliance. We'll be more. We tend to be more efficient operators because we're operating many MOBs. We have a national portfolio, for example, we're in 30 states and over 3 million square feet. So we can achieve economies of scale for buying and property management and utilities. And we also feel, I think, a gap for a lot of hospitals want to divest of the physical real estate, right? They want to focus on their operations, right? And they're being told more and more by their shareholders and investors, go back to your core competency. You can be in the real estate, occupy the real estate, but let somebody else own and operate that. So we feel that need. And a lot of doctors, for example, have operated their businesses or practices for many years. They're retiring and they'd like to achieve a return, not only by selling their practice, but also by selling the real estate to operators like us. And we give them, in return, we own and operate the building, and we do a sale lease back and allow them to remain. So in a way, I'd say for private equity real estate, I believe we're a benefit in general, and we're not making headlines in terms of operators in the operations that you sometimes hear of private equity firms going in and cutting costs in nursing homes and creating bad outcomes. We're not getting involved in that. In general, we're welcomed, I would say, as a provider of capital and more efficient building operations. So I'll stop there.
One question this is a burning question that I have myself, and I hope it isn't silly, but what is the difference between a private equity real estate fund and an equity real estate fund that is privately held? Is there a difference? It's like private equity is like kind of the hot topic, but
you're throwing curveballs at us.
Yeah, I think private equity can be in the form of an equity fund. It could just be a non-fund, right? So
right.
More importantly, it's equity that is not from a public company. It's from a private investor and operator such as us. And you can derive that money from, pension funds, a fund, individual investors. But it does, I think, importantly, seek to, it wants a higher return, right? It's not, a general passive investment. It's a very active investment, and returns usually are, north of, mid-teens and higher. So as opposed to public returns, which are the public markets, which can be whatever the market is.
Right. Okay. Catherine, did you want to say something?
So I actually wanted to ask David a question myself, really related to healthcare bankruptcies in healthcare companies that are owned by private equity. And I thought it's kind of interesting. I think you're seeing a very high, I want to say very high, I think 21% of the 80 healthcare companies that filed for bankruptcy were private equity owned. So I think that's kind of an interesting trend. And does that then impact if you're buying an asset where there's a private equity element in the operator side? Are people going to start to look at that and say, well, you know what, this group, we don't want to buy it? Is there going to be cap rate differentials as we see private equity hospital groups versus we're just throwing it out there to actually probably to both Andrew, David, and Jennifer.
Yeah, I can start it. It's a great question. Again, there are two main types of private equity: those that invest in the operators, right, which are what you're posing the question, which are hospitals and doctors and operations, right? Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's a very efficient industry. A lot of the operators are focused on healthcare delivery and not necessarily how to run a business. And so many of them, or a good number of them, are not as profitable as they could be. Some are near bankruptcy, some are in bankruptcy, some are over levered with debt. Debt's been very easy for a lot of operators to obtain over the years. So how do we approach that? We look at their balance sheets. Are they able to stay in business? What are the trends? How they manage their business over the years? What does the future look like? What does competition look like? But we really look at, how over levered they are. And, again, we don't really get into operations, but we're really careful about the bets we take. In fact, it's been more of an opportunity for us because it means that these assets, in many cases, are freed up. You've heard of the Stewart bankruptcy, where a lot of, in their case, they own a lot of real estate, right? Probably not the best idea for them. Again, they should be focusing, in terms of efficiency purely on their operations, healthcare delivery, right? Not as a real estate operator. So over the years, we've acquired a lot of assets from private equity firms who've stripped the operations from the real estate, right? And we take the real estate and we give them back a long lease. And that's been a win-win, quite frankly. So the other part of this is, well, gee, it sounds bad. They're not doing very well, or they're going into bankruptcy. Sure, that is bad. But we find that in almost every case, the demand is there. So you're just changing the ownership, the nameplate of the overall owner of that hospital or doctor's office, right? And then we look at the private equity firm who, in some cases, owns that, and to see how their balance sheet and their goals, their objectives, how long-term or short-term they are. So it's not really as big of a risk as you might think, because the overall demand is there. The doctors are there, right? And insurance is still paying for the service, right? That's what we have to keep in mind. It's really in some ways, it's a subsidized real estate sector. 94% of all Americans have healthcare insurance. So you're always going to have that backstop of demand. So I'm sure Andrew, you and others have got a view on this too.
Yeah, no, I think that was an excellent answer, David. I think, from our perspective, we see, as David said, we're focused primarily on the real estate because that's what fits our kind of risk-adjusted return expectations. And so, we're secured by the bricks and mortar, and then, the operator, they can focus on operating and delivering, care to patients. I think where it kind of is makes a lot of sense is because, especially over the last 5 years, with inflation and the cost of materials, even just building out, even a lower acuity, suite, it's becoming incredibly expensive. So at least, usually at least $150 to $200 a square foot to build out new, even if it's not, highly specialized, high acuity space, which is more like $350 to $450 a foot. And so a lot of times where we, I think see partnering with tenants is, not just, we're executing a lease, but also funding that TI and being able to, help build out that space above market TIs with, sometimes with amortized rent or, some other combination. So I think that's probably, for a lot of the physician groups, especially the the ones that aren't part of a large private equity backed physician group or a large health system, which is becoming fewer and fewer of the independent physician groups. But for those, it's a huge amount of money, $500,000, $1 million just to build out a new space to grow their business. So I think that's probably a good example of where real estate ownership is kind of helping, fund the growth for smaller physician groups. And then I think, where we're focused on, a lot of our tenancy is the nonprofit space. Obviously there's a lot of credit rating agencies out there. You can kind of dig into that. I will say though, this is kind of interesting, is that the nonprofit space and the for-profit healthcare space, it's not a huge divergence in their goals. A lot of the for-profit health systems, their charity care as a percentage, of their revenues, it's charity care, which is like just service without any reimbursement, is in a lot of times just as high or higher than the nonprofits. And so it's kind of the delivery of care for the for-profits. It's not they only serve people with insurance. They actually have a decent amount of charity care and write-offs, even relative to the nonprofits that they're, as the name implies, they're not focused on making profit, or they shouldn't be focused on making profits, but a lot of times they are making a lot of money. And so I think there is room in our demand across the healthcare space for profit, private equity backed. I think the efficiencies, as David said, is an important distinguisher. Delivery of care. And then I guess one other thing that we see a lot in our portfolio are operators specific of certain types, like a surgery center operator or a micro hospital operator, where they're partnering with a large health system. So there's a joint venture, they're both on the lease. We get more comfortable because we have a large entity behind the operator, but the operator is actually operating the space efficiently, because if anyone that's been in a hospital versus been in a smaller outpatient setting, it's two very different operations. And so I think leaning into that and having the joint venture partnerships between larger health systems and usually private equity backed specialized operators is a good solution as well.
Great. We've had a lot of weather events this year all over, not just coastal cities, but all over the country. And there's a lot of concern about insurance costs rising and insurance just not being available. How are investors dealing with the rising costs of insurance and other property related expenses? And Jennifer, I'd like you to address this first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. So yes, over the last couple of years, we have seen a lot of major catastrophic weather events, mostly in the Gulf Coast area. So we, when we go out to bid for our portfolio, our insurance for the year, we really go out to the market. We talk to several insurance companies and really cost compare. It's been interesting, however, this past year, one of the large carriers that we used to have, CNA, stopped writing policies in certain markets in the Texas area, especially in and around south of Houston. So fortunately for us, most of our properties, and we're really just focused on our multi-tenant medical outpatient buildings. They're all triple net buildings where we will always be reimbursed for property insurance by our tenants. However, we do want to be cognizant to make sure that it doesn't overburden the CAM reimbursement that we get back from the tenant. We partnered with a new insurance provider for this coming year. They've been great to work with. We are taking on some recommendations they have given to us to help reduce our premiums or to look better in the insurer's eyes. For example, for a very minimal cost, I think it's $1,200 to $1,500 per property, we are installing water detection meter devices that are installed at the connection point between the city where the water meter is in the street to how it's connected to the building. And the purpose of that water meter detection is to trigger any higher than normal water flow, which sometimes can signify something going on in the building, an overflowing toilet, a broken fire sprinkler head, or something that could possibly cause additional damage within the building. We've been very fortunate, though. We have had a zero loss history at these properties, which helps us mitigate, an increase in insurance expense. So that, again, fortunately has helped us. And so my advice is just continue to shop around for the best insurance provider and take heed to what's suggested by insurers or others to help mitigate the cost by taking proactive actions at your property.
Okay, anybody else have a comment on that? No? Okay, I'm gonna go on then. Catherine, how does property level supply and demand look for this asset class? Catherine with us? There you are. Can't hear you.
There we are. Apologies for that. So I was just making the comment, one could actually probably spend the entire hour actually just discussing that one particular topic. But in terms of just some highlights, from what we've been hearing from the brokerage perspective, and I head up the medical real estate for SVM. We have about just over 2,000 brokers across, 220 different offices, so almost in every state. And what we're seeing, what I'm hearing, is that there is a lot of dry powder ready for 2025. So we are, we're really expecting a very, very strong 2025. But to actually answer the question, just to make a few comments about supply and demand before we get into that. Obviously, the demand drivers, we'd be looking at the aging population. We've got the baby boomers. All of them are going to have hit retirement age by 2030, which will rapidly be upon us. We've got the shift towards outpatient care. The stability of healthcare tenants is why we saw so many operators, private equity groups and investors of all stripes moving into medical. It used to be a niche area, and now it very much has caught the attention during COVID as being incredibly stable when it comes to things like vacancy and the like. Other demand trends that we're seeing, an increased focus on preventative care. And, obviously, again, I'm probably stating the obvious here a little bit, but in terms of supply challenges, one of the strengths of medical is, the zoning and development restrictions mean you can't just build it anywhere. And certainly some markets are much stricter than others when it comes to what can be built. But they often have very strict zoning, construction regulations in California, earthquake retrofitting, and all the rest of it. High construction costs mean people are looking at that relationship between the cost to construct and building an as-built building. The limited availability of prime locations, and I think we may come into this a bit later, specialized build-outs. So with all that being said, incredibly strong investor demand. And, I think one of the key things that we saw for 2024, which was kind of interesting, was the rise of the private investor. We actually saw some of the REITs were kind of holding back. Some of the institutional players were holding back. We are expecting we're expecting it to be almost like basically business as usual in 2025 as people look to take advantage of the market, and the number of acquisitions we're expecting to increase. So again, I think I've kind of just touched on a couple of key items there, and yeah, we're expecting demand to outpace supply across the US, and you get different regional variations. I think with Jennifer's point about insurance, I think people are going to look to states like California and say, do we really want to be there? So I think looking at the NOI, looking at the expense, looking at the underlying numbers, I think the underwriting is going to be interesting, as well as what we're expecting to see with interest rates. We have that expectation that inflation may be under control. I don't want to jinx it, and that we will start to see increased amounts of financing from various different sources. So, all to be said, it's going to be a great year to be a broker in 2025.
And David, what does your pipeline look like? Part of my question is we're hearing about a lot of movement of people moving to different areas of the country. And are you seeing a lot of that, and how does that impact your pipeline and where you look for deals?
Yeah, I mean, our pipeline typically is a billion to $1.5 billion at any given time. So in terms of deal flow, it really remains all around the country. I think the classic focus for a lot of institutional investors are, the smile markets and primary markets, for example. But healthcare, you have a bigger canvas, I would say, because it's everybody needs healthcare, right?
Yeah.
It's not discretionary. It's subsidized, right? And it's a bit of a fallacy that everybody who ages goes to Florida or Arizona or a Sunbelt state. Most people do actually age in place. So you can find some great markets and not high growth areas or Rust Belt areas in affluent suburbs. And we find, as Catherine mentioned, there are other drivers, demographics, and aging population, also technology. We just see an increased capital intensity in the medical real estate space over the years for our tenants. They really have to invest more and more in technology and FF&E to be even competitive and to offer new treatments, new services. And I think this trend of things being more proactive, just a more proactive stance among patients, consumers through COVID, right, is quite interesting. So there are a number of trends that are pushing demand, and yeah, at this point, it's a very attractive supply-demand equation. There's more demand than supply, particularly over the last few years. What we haven't touched on yet is that it's been very difficult to get debt financing for new construction, for existing acquisitions and particularly new construction. The old rule of thumb used to be you've got to be at least half leased before you approach a bank and get your debt financing. Well, last few years, it's been more like 80, 90, 100%, right? So very little funding is going to speculative new development. And then, as Andrew mentioned, the replacement cost has gone up tremendously with inflation. It's much higher than we hear this 20% inflation number, that's embedded. It's actually much higher than that for construction, particularly medical construction. So replacement generally around the country for Class A and B new MOBs is sort of the low 500s all in, including land. So to make that economically justifiable, a new building is going to charge very high rents, high 30s, low 40s per square foot. It's nearly twice what the average is for existing MOBs. So not a lot of people are rushing to do that. Not a lot of developers or investors are rushing to do that. And in fact, a lot of the return, even in good time, more normal times, is not particularly stellar. It's usually sort of like 8, 9, 10% kind of returns, and then the asset itself is usually, in the scheme of things, as when you look at other in a relative framework, MOBs are very small. They're usually around 50,000 square feet, so you don't get a lot of bang for your buck in new development. So those factors are mitigating a lot of new supply, and then creating this we think, a very attractive environment for investors, particularly as Catherine mentioned, I think in 2025.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, it's I think as everyone just mentioned, the fundamentals are fantastic in medical outpatient. The occupancy, I think, is the highest it's been. The rent growth hasn't really, to date, exceeded kind of that 3% mark, the 2 to 3% that historically everybody's kind of expected for medical. It hasn't really exceeded that yet. So, as David just said, if replacement cost is 50% higher now and replacement rents are, that means all of those rents that are still in the low to mid 20s, triple net on average, have a long way to go up. And so I think if you're looking at the space and you're saying, all right, occupancy's ticking up, supplies, I think the lowest over the last couple of quarters, I think new supply is the lowest it's been in a long time, maybe 10, 15 years. And the rents haven't moved yet. There is probably an opportunity to mark to market kind of in a meaningful way across most assets. And I will say the governor on that is, and I think David mentioned this earlier, it's a quasi, healthcare in general is quasi free market, because it's, you've got the health systems that are, if they're 50 to 70% of your building, you're not going to go in there and increase the rents to market. You know, as much as there are some REITs that have done it, and it honestly hasn't gone well, because I think there's a lot of bad feelings about that. So I think there's going to be this disconnect between in-place rents and new construction rents, but it won't be like the other sectors where those eventually close the gap, just because nobody's going to really, you know, move the rents that much on their existing large healthcare tenants. So I think it'll, instead of 3%, it'll probably be 4 to 5% rent growth, which will, you know, is stellar for the space, but it won't be like apartments or industrial where you had a couple of years where you went 10 to 15% rent pops and then you kind of caught up. So it's going to be I think a medium to strong outperformance for 5 to 10 years, just the way it's embedded right now.
And the the interest rate environment has been prohibitive of new construction, but are you, Jennifer, are you seeing any new construction? Do you do any financing of new construction, any of you?
We personally at MedProperties, we're not engaged in any financing of new construction, so to speak. However, I do want to chime in on a couple of things the panel has spoken about as it relates to construction cost and the smaller tenants, and not really barrier to entry, but the smaller tenants, say 2,000 square feet or lower in size, right? They are looking for lease space that it's essentially move-in ready, right? So sometimes we have a few spaces across our portfolio where we have that one remaining vacant, or those 2 small spaces that are in shell condition, and it's a matter of do we build it and they will come mindset, or is it do we wait for that tenant to do 6-month improvement and they have to wait and pay out of pocket. So that's one of the conflicts that we're constantly looking at. A lot of the drivers behind what decision we make is based on that building, where we are with the holding time left on that particular property, what's going on in the market, and honestly, how much it's going to cost to put in a tenant. So, but to echo what I believe Andrew was saying, that even just new construction for just the tenant build out for an already existing building is easily $200 a foot for non-specialty. So that's kind of our conundrum that we're constantly weighing with our smaller spaces that need to be leased.
And is there, what do you think the ceiling is on that? If it's 200 and it goes to 250, I mean, what can the market bear as far as that goes?
Yeah, I think you just have to, it's all about dialing the knobs, right? And all about where does it pencil? How can you, how much can you increase? Let's say you give a $200 tenant improvement allowance, but perhaps the bill that's $250, the tenant doesn't want to come out of pocket, so you amortize it back into the rent, right? But at what point, as you're saying, does it not make sense from a rental rate objective? And 2, even if you are able to get a very loaded rental rate, what is that going to look like on an exit, right? Does a buyer value that higher above market rental rate, or are they going to give you that discount because they know that really that the top layer is really just amortized tenant improvements? So that is a very good point.
Well, we've covered this a little bit, but Andrew, I wanted to ask you, because you oversee several different funds, what investment opportunities you see. I believe you mentioned surgery centers, outpatient. Are we seeing a rise in assisted living? I mean, there's a need for it, but are we seeing those facilities being offered now more?
Yeah, it's yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I want to make clear, I don't oversee the funds. Nuveen has several funds. I'm just the way we're set up is I'm the head of the healthcare, and so we are providing services to each of the funds, whether new acquisitions or developments. So definitely not the smart portfolio managers making the decisions. I just execute. So I will say we actually have on the development side, because, given our size and the attractiveness of the space, we are kind of executing both on acquisitions. We did a larger portfolio a couple months ago, and then also development. So we actually do have 3 larger MOB developments that have delivered over the last couple months. They're about, between the 3 of them, it's about 330,000 square feet, about 250 million of development. So larger deals, they're about 90% leased. And so I think that's kind of those, but I would say were started post-COVID. So that's kind of a good reflection of these larger outpatient buildings are actually, the cost is very much creeping up from, I think, MOBs for a long time, whereas the average deal was like 20 million. These were all kind of more 50 to 60 to 70 million dollar construction costs. Now they're highly, they're what I would argue is Class A plus medical outpatient with anchor healthcare tenancy. So the per square foot numbers are $500-600 a foot, and they're almost more like an extension of the hospital in a lot of cases than kind of an outpatient. But just to answer your question about are we doing development? Yeah, we've got about $250 million that have delivered over the last 2 months. And our goal is to do about 300 to 500 million of new construction starts per year going forward, just given our kind of our desire in the space. And, we partner with developers across the US. So that's kind of on the development side. And in terms of the senior housing, I think the opportunity is certainly that aging demographic that, I kind of equated it to someone internally where people, started talking about this 20 years ago. I started my career 15, 16 years ago, and people were talking about it then. I think it's actually hitting now. And I think the difference was people were thinking that, as baby boomers turned 65, that was kind of the pivot point. It's actually more like 75 to 80. And so you're actually seeing the meat of that population turning 75 to 80 now, starting essentially this year and kind of through 2030, where I think the 80-year-old population grows by like 4 to 6% per year instead of 1.5 as it has done for the last couple of decades. So it's material. And if you look at senior housing development starts, it's really low because it's really hard to get it financed. Similar to medical outpatient new developments, you have to go out, and we just did this. You have to go out to about 80 to 100 lenders just to get, one actual strong loan quote. And a lot of the times the size is a constraint. So you may have to do a 2 or 3 party lender kind of consortium to build out the capital stack. So we are, that is a lot of work, but we feel like we're going to get paid for it in the next couple of years when their senior housing deliveries will probably be at a record low and demand will be kind of high. And so the reason senior housing and medical outpatient sit under our side is 2 very different operating businesses, but kind of underpinned by the same macro trend of this kind of aging population, the amount of money that gets spent towards the end of life in healthcare. That's kind of the connection for us, but it's 2 very different operating models, where the medical outpatient is very much what I would say build best in class buildings, work with your tenants to kind of create the ecosystem that works for them, and they operate their business. Versus the senior housing, it's all about the operators that we hire to manage our buildings. Is how, it's almost more like the hotel business is kind of how I would equate senior housing. But we're very bullish on both sectors.
Great, thank you. Catherine or David, do you want to add to that?
So I just wanted to echo something that Andrew said earlier, talking about the medical outpatient projects under construction. So I was actually reading a report from CBRE, and they had basically done a study of the largest medical outpatient buildings under construction, and basically saying that they're all either hospital campus or healthcare campus adjacent outpatient centers. with significant government or institutional healthcare provider backing. So, you know, I mean, that very much seems to be, I think, the trend, and that's probably related to the difficulty of financing. So I think 2025, it'll be interesting to see. I think that trend will start to reverse. Yeah, I mean, really, I'm not. I think we're all echoing and saying the same thing here.
Yeah. David, any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of construction costs, replacement costs, they never seem to go down. They're very sticky. So people hoping for, you know, return to, you know, 5 years ago is probably not going to happen. So and I think they'll just you know, again, I think the cost of inflation, medical inflation, will always be, you know, above overall inflation going forward. But the other part of the equation is that most of our tenants really, the cost of occupancy is lower than you might think for other types of tenants. I mean, medical is usually about 10% or even lower. So there is room to increase the cost of occupancy for them. And these buildings, our buildings, and most MOBs are actually mission critical. They're medical clinical, so they really have to be there, right? So we do have a lot of leverage. And then because they have to invest more and more, the capital intensity is increasing all the time. They have to put just a lot more equipment in their space, and so you know, that's even more expensive than real estate. So by comparison, you know, we look like a bargain actually. So I think we can pass along a lot of these costs going forward, and then the overall picture is that demand just keeps on increasing. You know, demographically, aging population. You know, just being, I think a lot of people in our society are being much more proactive about their healthcare, which is a good thing,
Yeah.
right? And then there are these new specializations, you know, coming, being developed and put out in the market all the time. I mean, genetic testing, right, is going to be very big pretty soon. You know, so many different procedures, robotics. You know, we use a Da Vinci machine in many of our tenants, but you know, that's going to become much more important. So we just see it's going to be stickier, and we can pass along more of these costs going forward. And just in terms of supply, it's not getting easier from a regulatory point of view as well. I mean, you have all these regulatory agencies, they're purpose built. You know, it takes longer and longer, it seems, to get a project even entitled, let alone built. So you know, all these factors, and I just don't see an abatement of healthcare demand in our society. We're as a society, unfortunately, we're getting less healthy. We're, you know, you look at the number of diseases, you know, cancer, for example, is increasing almost on a yearly basis. Obesity is a big driver of healthcare demand. So, you know, that's good for our business, unfortunate for our society, but I don't see those trends reversing anytime soon.
Right. Jennifer, I wanted to switch it up a little bit here and ask about the use of prop tech and creating efficiencies, and maybe if anybody is using AI also.
Yeah, so we are a very small, very lean shop. So anytime that we can outsource tasks, we are looking for opportunities to do so. So just in the last year, honestly, we've outsourced or we've engaged prop tech for our debt management loans. We are able to keep all of our loans in one place. It helps generate our lender compliant report. It provides forecasting for cap rates and hedge and interest rates going forward. It's a really, really great tool. We also are implementing another technology platform to help with certificate of insurance management. In all my years in the commercial real estate asset management and property management field, this is one of those things that's so important that I've never been able to fully put my hands around and manage on an efficient basis. We're really excited about having that deployed, having someone help us monitor them, collect them, and to make sure that they are accurate, right, and are correct. And then we're also employing a payable system where everything's done via email. Everything is AI based, and there's lots of platforms out there that offer this service, but that's another time giver back, that it's coming back to our team as far as reviewing, approving, and managing invoices. And we're also just internally getting on the AI bandwagon, if you will. Each of us are taking an interest of what AI platforms are out there and how they can help us even in our day-to-day job, such as financial modeling. You know, obviously we use Argus a lot, but as other people do, but sometimes you just need help putting together another financial report. We use it for lease abstraction services. It's a lot cheaper than outsourcing, and then also just general tenant communication. So we're very excited about getting over to, getting to that next generation of property management.
Great. And Catherine, knowing where you are and what you cover, I imagine that's a big thing for you as well.
Yeah, well, actually, I just wanted to comment actually more on the tenant side of things, because I think as technology continues to advance, you're going to see more and more procedures shifting from ASCs and hospitals to medical outpatient buildings. And so I think that's going to be a very, very interesting trend to watch. So, and obviously, we've seen more and more of these MOBs moving into secondary markets, retail locations, but it's directly, I think, related to the fact that you can do more and more sophisticated procedures in these outpatient facilities in a way, 10 years ago you couldn't possibly do some of that surgery work and preventative medicine and analysis and all the rest of it. So I think that's it's interesting just to keep an eye on actually what the tenants themselves and what's going on in their worlds. Because that has a direct impact on the amount of space they need to occupy and where they need to occupy it. But I think commenting on the brokerage side of things, I mean, historically brokers tend to be, I think, one of the last adopters of technology. I mean, I'm not particular. I mean, I'm in my 50s, early 50s. When I entered the industry, there was still resistance about having computers. I mean, it was extraordinary, So I think we tend to be the brokerage world. We tend to be late adopters. We will be kicking and screaming by the clients who will require us to be using these services. And SVN, I think, actually is probably one of it. A lot of people, I think, are trying to experiment, but when it comes down to it, your average broker is probably in their 60s, if not their 70s. And so I think until you get the younger cohort coming on board, I think we may have some time to wait before we're really fully adopting AI and some of these other tools that I'm sure could be very, very useful.
Yeah, as Andrew commented, we're retiring kicking and screaming. So we still want to be involved. David, what about you in technology?
Yeah, we use a lease abstraction software, which is pretty amazing. It's cheap, it's easy to use, but we have an enormous number of leases, and you can't keep track. The human brain can't keep track of all the things you need to keep track of. So it'll abstract and it will push it to your certain points, certain milestones and dates to your calendar and to your email, and it's wonderful. So usually we would outsource that to an attorney, and that would take a while, but now we can do it immediately. And again, we can query them. So useful. Usually, in the past, it's been very daunting. You've got to have a few people who are the lease demigods, right? And they memorize all the leases. They're amazing. It's like we don't have to do that anymore. So you're really saving up a lot of time for that. And again, it's a very easy and inexpensive software to use. The other part, and I concur with Catherine's comment, real estate in general is a laggard, a technology laggard. But we're looking at doing a lot more research with AI, and that's been pretty amazing. So market research, tenant research, credit research, and we're experimenting with that now. But I think by the end of probably or mid next year, we'll be using a lot more of that. So that's great. I've done some market research for properties that we're looking at. Usually we have a very large, robust part of our underwriting is research. And so that's been pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's been pretty good. It's a big time saver. And so that will just get better and better, in a very short period of time. So those are the two areas that we're we are using and will be probably use more going forward. And probably I think the third leg will be more portfolio management software. We're looking at a few of those packages and they look pretty good. To be able to query your portfolio, to slice and dice, to create reports. We do that a bit in Argus, which is really I think very good and getting better. But these portfolio management softwares that we're seeing, we're evaluating should do an even better job.
Wow. How about
Dave-
you, Andrew? Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, David, we deployed a portfolio management software last year, so I'll connect with you and give you my 2 cents on
Oh,
some of
nice.
the work
Great.
that we did to investigate those platforms.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Andrew? Technology?
Yeah, it's funny. Real estate is also very, as everyone said, is a very slow adopter of technology. So, my wife makes fun of me because I was excited when we used shared like Microsoft Excel and Word document files, and she's like, it's been around for like a decade, and I was like, oh, we don't have to send the email to Excel back and forth. We can actually do it at the same time. So, it's slow adopters in the real estate industry. But yeah, similarly, the lease abstraction software is great. It, not only abstracts it, but it sends you notices when things are coming due or whatever. So that's been super helpful. I mean, I think, I was at a lunch event the other day, and the speaker was saying that healthcare is the most disruptable health, for AI, like it just broadly the healthcare industry, which, and when you think about it, it's closing in on 20% of our GDP, which is double of every other country, or more than double in a lot of cases. So we just spend all this money in healthcare, and it's because it's a pretty inefficient delivery, if you think about insurers and reinsurance and all the different contracts. And so I think AI will come in, if used effectively over the coming years, will actually hopefully make it a little bit more efficient, just to be able to, go from being, having the visit at the clinical space to insurance and being, having that payment instead of being what it is today. I think most of us have encountered having to, fight the insurance company to get reimbursed for something. I think there's a huge disruption just in the healthcare space overall that, it seems like AI is well poised to do.
We don't have a lot of time left, and I'm not seeing any questions. If somebody else sees the Q&A a different way, let me know. But what I'll open it up to what would you all like? Anything else you all would like to talk about?
Well, we can, well, we just had an election, right? And so I think
Yes.
the billion-dollar question, maybe the trillion-dollar question is, what might be the impact of a new administration on healthcare, right? There's been talk in the past of maybe rolling back the ACA and making healthcare more efficient. So, my own view, it's very difficult to roll back a broad social entitlement like healthcare, right? Something like 24 million new insured people came in under the ACA. It might actually be a little higher than that. So to scale that back, or to even to eliminate it, I think would be foment a revolution in this country. So, but I'm curious to hear what the other panelists think about the new administration, what might be in store for us.
Yeah, the political views. I think it'll be interesting because putting aside political, I think the efficiency of both our government and the efficiency of a lot of the healthcare systems, bureaucracy, whether it's better policies, AI, whatever, there's a lot of improvement opportunities, and like most large organizations, there's a lot of redundancy. Our government is, the largest of organizations, and healthcare is a big part of it, as I mentioned. So, I think driving towards efficiency, we'll see if it can be done by one person, or if it's gradual by tech or policy. But there's a lot of I would say wasted money in the space just with redundancies. So, I'm all for kind of making it more efficient.
We have actually gotten some questions come in, so I'll ask this first one. How is the move to home health and telehealth affecting medical office building demand? That
I
anyone?
start on the response. I mean, I think healthcare was seen as probably a threat to physical in-person demand. I think it's been almost the opposite, because it's really been almost a patient feeder, patient referral mechanism. It's a way for patients, an easy way to connect with your healthcare provider to get a better understanding of what's going on. And almost invariably, they'll say, well, we've done all we can in this short conversation. You have to come in. You have to come in for a test, a procedure, whatever. And it sort of drives a lot of people to physical healthcare demand. So I think it's been a boon. I think it's been a great thing for our society and our economy to educate the consumer, right, to make it easier and cheaper. So it's been a win-win in that particular aspect.
Yeah. And I would say, particularly for those rural areas, it's really bit, as you say, it just enables them to have that first point of contact, and then decide whether they need to come in or not. But I think probably from an architectural and build out point of view, it's just one more factor of having a green room or having your medical records set up in such a way that the doctors can interact and have the information they need available. So I think as more and more doctors are doing they need the technology in addition to the actual computer. They're not just sort of sitting in bed doing these calls. So I think I mean there's a need for the physical building. So, and I think that's what I think the question was focused on. The rise of telemedicine does not mean that the medical outpatient buildings are going away. So, and in fact, quite the opposite. We're going to see huge demand next year, and I'm hoping that supply will gradually come in and start to make up for lost time. We've seen vacancies fall, we've seen rents increase. So hopefully at some point the trigger is reached where we can actually start to see some more medical buildings built with telemedicine in mind, with specialized rooms and equipment for that aspect.
That's a great point, having personally been involved with some of those. We are a global organization, and we have only touched on the United States today, and I apologize to our global friends. But do any of you, are you outside of the US, invested outside of the US, or are you looking at that for this particular asset class?
I mean, as Nuveen, we're a global company, and so we have senior housing in Japan and looked at stuff in Europe. So I think we'll probably continue to, but each country is obviously very nuanced. But I think the demand for senior housing is pretty consistent across country, and so the private pay there kind of avoids the insurance nuance of each country. So I think that is probably a space we'll continue to grow in most countries.
Okay. I want to thank you all so much. I see that Deb Cloutier has joined us again to wrap things up. I hope everyone has enjoyed this webinar, and we thank you for your attendance and your participation.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, David, Catherine, Jennifer, and Andrew. The resiliency of this asset class has really been proven over several real estate cycles, and I greatly enjoyed the discussion today that covered everything from the flows of capital to macro trends to unpackaging both some of the challenges and opportunities that continue to evolve in this space and really drive MOB as a stellar investment class for all of us. So thank you very much for your time and your expertise. Please join us for 2 special events next month. On December 4th, the European CRE chapter will present a solutions-focused debate on Europe's affordable housing crisis, and that is looking to be a really dynamic, spicy conversation, so I hope you can join us. And on December 12th, join us for a year in review, a fireside chat with our very own counselors, Victor Kalanog and Jonathan Shine, which always proves to be an interesting conversation to watch and to participate in. You may register for both of these events at cre.org. And until then, on behalf of the Counselors of Real Estate, thank you for attending this session of What's Next for Real Estate and the Life Experience. We hope you have a lovely and safe day.
Thank you.
You.